how he would rate them starting with C.H. Rascal. Man, he was a bulldog. He won 5 contract matches, and several more off the chain, but he couldn't be recognized as a grand champion because he lost his first fight. I refereed that fight. It was 105 degrees that day and Rascal got hot and didn't scratch. Mountain Man Ch Homer Rum he didn't quit fighting. In other words, he did not cur. I've seen a lot of dogs do that and a lot of people holler he's a cur. But if one don't scratch it don't necessarily mean he's a cur. There've been many dogs destroyed as curs that weren't. I never did see a dog that could put Rascal behind. Even the one he lost to died less than a half hour after the match. I put a dog on him once, a real hard-biting dog out of Big Boy that I'd never seen any dog put behind. Rascal put him behind, and kept him behind for over an hour until he quit. Rascal fought any style but liked to work the head. He could overcome any style of one that was put on him. I think that there are as many good dogs going back to Ch Rascal as any dog that's been bred in the last 25 years. The Stompanato dog was supposed to be very closely related to Rascal, same sire, and their dams were bred about the same. I know that the two bloodlines seem to go real well together. Susie was off Stompanato and produced some good ones bred to Rascal Jr. Stompanato was a well-built, good-looking dog. I never saw him rolled. In fact, I'd heard 2 different stories on the dog. One was that he had won 2 in Mexico, and the other was that he was cold. I don't know whether he was cold or not, but a lot of good bulldogs today carry Stompanato blood. Buster was another one I heard 2 different stories told about, that he'd won one and that he was cold also. John Shivar bought him from Maurice Carver for a 5th of whiskey, I heard. He kept Buster either 2 weeks or 2 months and then he died. Lapace got the dog and he died after keeping the dog for about the same length of time. I bred to Buster when he was very old, but didn't get any pups. He sure produced some good ones. His daughter Grch Miss Rage killed every dog she went into but one. And she killed that one too, the second time she beat it. I saw Midnight Cowboy go. He was a little black dog, short, and kind of bow-legged. He was a really good dog, one of the best in my opinion. I'd put him in the top 10 of all the dogs I've seen fight. He bit good and hard, not as hard as some dogs I've seen, but hard enough to win. I saw Chivo kill a dog of Billy Collins in less than 30 minutes. God, he was a bulldog. I'd say he was also about one of the best I've seen. Mr. Hughes also named Grch Boomerang as one of the best. He was an ace, he said, but he feels the hardest biting dog he ever saw was Grch Zebo. Grch Adams Zebo, 7XW, Rom Ch Homer was a hard biter, but Zebo was the hardest. His fights never went very long, which tells you he was biting hard enough to kill his opponents. They claim Greaser didn't die. I don't know if he did or not, but I never did hear anyone more tell of him, even though they say he was retired to stud. There wouldn't have even been much competition in that match if Greaser hadn't had a 3-pound advantage. I saw the old tramp Red Boy dog go. He beat me one time. He was a good solid bulldog. Some people say he couldn't bite, that he won because he had no real competition. Huey Hicks brought a big bitch to me that he wanted to match into Red Boy, and I did, and for about 40 minutes it looked as if she was going to kill Red Boy right there in the pit. Then he got to biting on her head real hard, and he could bite hard. He stopped her in 1 hour and 17 minutes. That was the only time I matched a female against a male, and it wasn't my match. Even back then it was unusual, and I don't believe in it. It isn't fair to either one. There are times when a male won't fight a female as hard. Most of the time the female would have an advantage because of that. And a female won't always fight a male as hard as another bitch. That's just my opinion. Someone else might feel different. Mr. Hughes also saw the great Ch Honeybunch in action, and told us I believe she was one of the best bitches I've ever seen. In her first match she beat a dog that I conditioned and handled, killed it. I refereed her next match against a bitch named Bonnie. She killed that one too. We were somewhat surprised by his answer when we asked him about Finley's Grch Bo, if he'd seen him fight, and if he was a very game dog. No, he replied. He refused to scratch in front of between 75 and 100 people when he lost his second fight to Vindicator. I wouldn't say he was a rank cur, In fact, Vindicator was probably the only dog that could have beaten him. Bo got on Vindicator's head for the first 15 minutes or so. He had a very good mouth and was biting hard. But then, Vindicator started to work on his front legs real bad. He'd work on the first one, then the other, then back to the first and so on, and Bo did start singing a little. LP bet Bob $100 that he wouldn't scratch, but he did make his scratch and Bob picked him up. He refused to go across on his courtesy scratch. When he stood the line, my exact words to Bob were, "Bob, walk over to the other corner and see if he'll follow you." He did, but Bo just turned and faced into the corner of the pit. Bo went on to win 5 or 6 more matches after he quit that time. I didn't see GRCH snake fight, but James Crenshaw told me he was a hell of a dog. CH Jeep was a good game dog, but I've seen better. I don't want to take anything away from him, he just wasn't the greatest dog of all time like some people say he was. He was real game, any dog that will go 3 hours and 45 minutes is. I know some people have said that he couldn't have taken the same abuse he dished out in that match. He was ahead in that one right from the start, but he had proven in his match with the Wiener dog that he could come from behind to win. I didn't see that fight, but I heard Wiener had him confused for a good part of that match. Mountain Man CH Homer Rum Wiener was a funny looking dog. He was 1 dog high and 2 dogs long. I've seen a couple of dogs built like that, which could really bite hard and had a lot of driving power to them. We asked Mr. Hughes who was the hardest biting dog he's seen since GRCH Zebo, and the hardest biting bitch. The hardest biting dog I've seen in the past 10 years or so would be CH Homer. As far as I know, no dog ever went a half hour with Homer and lived. He also killed several dogs in rolls before I matched him. The very best and hardest biting bitch I've ever seen is GRCH Spooky, out of Homer and Susie. I bred Spooky and schooled her out before selling her to Ricky Jones. During that time I got rid of several dogs I don't think I gave a fair appraisal of. I had rolled them with Spooky and they looked bad. But Spooky was so good she made every dog she went into look bad. The only dog I ever saw look good against her was the bitch Bobby Hall matched into her, Jeanette. She fought even with Spooky for over an hour. Spooky took a terrible head chewing, but was in the other bitch's chest most of the time. She did stop her though, she refused to scratch at 1 hour and 42 minutes. I've heard people say she couldn't scratch, but she could have gone across. The very first time I saw Zebo, he bit me, Mr. Hughes began. Me and William Cable had come to Lonzo's house to look at his dogs. Lonzo had his dogs tied along a narrow path, and if you got one step the wrong way, they could reach you. I started walking along the path behind Lonzo towards the dogs and stopped and asked him if any of the dogs could get to us. No, and they wouldn't bite, you know how, he answered, and we kept walking. We went a few steps further and a black dog hit the end of his chain and grabbed me by the arm. I swung my fist and punched him in the jaw, knocking him off, and that was the very first time I laid eyes on Zebo. Willie Brown was there with his wife and daughter. He and Lonzo were rolling out a bunch of dogs. They rolled one of Willie's bitches on Lena, that was Zebo's sister, and then they rolled Vindicator and Zebo. It was a short roll the way those dogs were hurting each other, it couldn't have gone very long without them killing each other. Vindicator was really punishing Zebo's front legs, but Zebo was hurting Vindicator's nose, putting holes in his muzzle the size of my little finger, and the blood was running all over. Vindicator was Lonzo's favorite, but I asked Willie privately which dog he liked better, and he said he'd seen them both rolled before and he liked Zebo the best. I liked the dog real good, but I didn't buy Zebo that day. I went back a couple of months later and Lonzo had rolled Zebo on a dog that weighed about 85 pounds, I believe. His shoulder had been messed up really bad. Mrs. Hughes adds, his one leg was just sort of hanging there, it looked like it had near about been tore right off. I bought Zebo and took him home. William Cable took him to his vet's and had his shoulder reconstructed. The surgery cost $75, which was a lot of money back then. Lonzo let me have Zebo on time. I paid him so much 1 month, then so much another month until it was all paid. He still leads people to believe I still owe him for Zebo, but I paid him every penny. At a later date I went back and bought 4 female pups from Lonzo, Off Mike, and Angie, and paid for those on time too. But I held back $20 on each pup when I paid him because Willie Brown told me I'd never see the papers on them, that Lonzo wouldn't spend the money to send for them, and that's the story of the $80 I owe Lonzo Pratt. Out of the 5 dogs I bought from Lonzo, I got 3 really good ones. I give him a plus for that. Anytime you buy 5 dogs from a man, you're more than likely to get 5 curs than 3 good dogs. Lonesome one too, and another bitch was dead game and died in a kennel fight. Of the 2 that didn't work out, one was cold and the other one fought 15 minutes and then quit. After his shoulder was all healed, I matched Zebo. His first fight was an easy one. The match was against a friend of mine that I'd been in the service with at 40 pounds. The dog he brought was really about a 35-pounder that weighed 40 pounds, and Zebo killed it in 17 minutes. Bob Finley had a 2-time winner called Pete, and we matched at 42 pounds. Pete had won his fights at a higher weight, and Zebo came in at 41 3/4, which was too heavy for him. He was a good, strong, hard-biting dog, or he'd have been in trouble. Zebo killed Pete in 26 minutes. His next was into my friend from the service again, and that was a pretty good fight, but Zebo won in about 30 minutes and that dog died too. His dog was real game and would have scratched at the end of the fight, if he could have. I don't believe that man messed with any more bulldogs after that. He was into the law pretty heavy, still is if he hasn't retired. And I don't mean he's a deputy sheriff or anything like that, he's up in the top bracket of the law. Junior Bush called and said he had a match for Zebo in Alabama, against a feller by the name of Esslinger that was into the dogs pretty heavy at that time. We turned him loose, and when that feller seen what was happening, I saw he kinda felt like he'd been set up. He walked over to where I was standing and said that one can kill a dog, can't he? And I replied, yeah, just recently he killed 2. And if you don't pick yours up, he'll kill him too. And Zebo did, winning the fight in 23 minutes. Dave and Roger Adams had saw Zebo the day he fought in Alabama. Dave looked him over, pointed to his back end and asked me why he didn't have any scars there. I answered, as far as I know, no dog has ever got to his back end. He called me after the match wanting to buy Zebo, and I told him that I didn't want to sell the dog. He made me an offer, and I made him an offer that I did not believe he would pay for the dog, and that was the end of the conversation. I was eating breakfast the next morning and looked out the window to see Dave Adams' car pull into the yard. He'd come for Zebo. He wanted to get Zebo off the chain himself. A few moments later I saw him running away from Zebo's spot. Zebo had almost bit him and ran him off. I had to load Zebo in their car myself. They hadn't brought a box or crate with them, and when they left, Zebo was riding in the front seat between them, looking out the window. I was wondering if by the time they got to Ohio either of them would have any face left. Mr. Hughes shakes his head.
Lester Hughes, a.k.a. the Mountain Man. The history of his great dogs. This is starting from scratch. Hit the like, subscribe button. More content coming about these great American Pit Bull Terriers, starting from scratch.